Good evening, everybody. My name is the Gribble Snitch, and today we are going to be taking a look at the similarities and differences between the Indonesian and Balinese languages. Let's start off simple with a little song. It's called Merah Putih, meaning red and white. It was written shortly after Indonesia gained its independence, and it was written in both Indonesian and Balinese. And upon seeing these two versions, I found the differences and similarities rather striking. Here I have three versions of the song. The one on the left in red is the Indonesian version, and the one on the right in white is the Balinese version, with an English version in grey below it. With a cursory glance, you can probably tell there are indeed similarities. And here I have highlighted them for you. That is, there is a lot of vocabulary shared between the two. What stood out most to me, however, were the differences, and I thought I would use that as a jumping off point for a bit of research into the differences between Indonesian and Balinese, because as much as there are parts of Balinese that I can recognise, a good lot of it I couldn't. Let's start with something we should all be familiar with, and one of the first things I learnt when studying Indonesian, and that is pronouns. First thing you'll probably learn when learning Indonesian is that there are two sets of pronouns, formal and informal, and you can see them here. Now those two different sets of pronouns do exactly what they say on the tin. One is used for formal situations, so you're talking to your boss, or you're at a speech, or you're talking to an older relative, talking to your parents, that sort of thing. And informal is, well, informal situations when you're just talking to friends, perhaps your kids, that sort of thing. Now, unlike English, Indonesian doesn't have cases. So while you do have multiple words depending on the context, the word you use is the same within that context. You don't have to go mix between I, me and my. You just say saya as the formal for all of those. And we can see this demonstrated here. If you wanted to say this is my house, you say ini adalah rumah saya in a formal situation, but if you're just talking to your friend, it would be ini rumahku. You use the different pronouns saya in a formal sentence and aku in an informal sentence. Moving on to Balinese, we can see that there is a similar system in play. There are at least two sets of pronouns. They're sometimes split into three, but for the most part they are considered to be two sets. However, this doesn't extend to just pronouns. A lot of words will have a polite and impolite form, and further than that, they aren't necessarily polite and impolite. They are classed as low and high, and this stems from the old Hindu caste system. So just like Indonesian, what words you would use depends on the context. However, there is a cemented way of telling when you would use a certain word because of the caste you belong to in contrast to someone else. So you know you are speaking in a formal manner when you are speaking to someone of a higher caste. As you can see here, if you are speaking to someone perceived as above you, you would use the high register. But if it's the other way around, we would use something from the low register, as we can see here. It's also worth noting that one of these words, kai, from what I read, has a connotation of being used specifically in an angry situation, which I think is very interesting. Moving on from pronouns, another easy point of comparison between languages in general is vocabulary, and this overall is used for determining the genetic relationship between languages. Here we can see a reinforcement of the similarities we saw in the song Merah Putih, that there are words that are shared between them. However, it differs depending on which register of Balinese you are using, and that the word in particular can also differ in origin as well. To this degree, how similar Indonesian and Balinese can be can depend entirely on the register being used, and even more so on the specific words. So if we can look here, we can see that the Low Balinese and Indonesian share the same word for this. However, they differ in the word for big, gede in Low Balinese and besar in Indonesian. However, when you move on to a different word, say the word for hair, it is the same in High Balinese as with Indonesian, rambut, coming from Javanese. However, the word in Low Balinese is different. However, looking at both registers of Balinese, we can see that they both have the same word, taluh, which is cognate, that is related to the Indonesian word telur, meaning egg. This not only provides evidence of further similarities between the two languages, but definitely demonstrates that they have more than just similarities. They have a shared history together, and that they have a genetic affiliation with each other as well. It is also worth noting that I mentioned Javanese, and Javanese, just like Balinese, has different vocabularies depending on the register. That is, different contexts determine which words you use, and that there are a lot of shared words between Javanese and Balinese, and likewise the two and Indonesian. It is worth mentioning, however, the specific affiliation between these languages is rather blurred because they have so much influence between each other. All we know is that they belong to the same general family, that is Austronesian within the Malayo-Polynesian grouping. However, it is hard to tell how related to each other they are because of how much time they have spent together interacting with each other, sharing these features, not only sharing vocabulary, but also, evidently, this stratification between vocabularies depending on the context within which you are speaking. Throughout this video, I will be using the Latin alphabet, that is the alphabet we use for English, though it is worth noting that Indonesian and Balinese use different writing systems traditionally, while today they all use mostly the Latin alphabet. Balinese traditionally uses its own Balinese writing system. Our writing system and Indonesians are what is called an alphabet, that is, every sound, vowels, and consonants have their own letters. So R, E, I are their own letters, as well as B, K, D, G, so on and so forth. In Balinese, the letters are only consonants with an inherent vowel on them, ha, na, cha, ra. What you do to change the vowel is you add a little diacritic to it, and then ha becomes he, he, who, so on and so forth. This is what is called an abugida, or an alpha syllabary. This system is used throughout Indonesia for a variety of other Indonesian languages, including the aforementioned Javanese, as well as Sundanese, Rejang, and Makassarese. But here on now, we're going to get a little spooky. That's right. It's scary grammar time. Let's start off with what is known as a simple noun phrase. That is a noun and an adjective. For instance, a big dog. If we look here, both languages share the same order. That is the noun and then the adjective, unlike in English. So in Indonesian, anjing besar, and in Balinese, cicing gede. They both have the word for big, besar, and gede after the word for dog, anjing and cicing. Now when we look at this phrase in Indonesian, the word anjing besar can mean more than just big dog. It can mean a big dog, the big dog, several big dogs. However, you can specify which of its meanings those specifically mean. That big dog, anjing besar itu, this big dog, anjing besar ini, so on and so forth. However, these are all optional. If you wanted to just say anjing besar, it can mean any of those things. This is in contrast to Balinese, wherein we can see that there is what is called definitiveness. That is a difference between big dogs in general and the big dog, with adding this suffix e. So big dog is just cicing gede, but the big dog is cicing gede. And if you wanted to say the big dogs, you have to say cicing ajak makejang gede. So it is different from Indonesian in that you have to make those specifications. You cannot mean multiple things within one simple noun phrase. Moving on, we can have a look at the basic syntax, what we might call the word order, where a subject, verb, and object go. However, what we're going to be using is the terms patient and agent. That is, an agent is the thing or person doing the verb, and the patient is the thing receiving the verb. And when we have a look Indonesian and Balinese, they have a different basic syntax. That is, in Indonesian, if I wanted to say the dog is chasing the cat, anjing mengejar kucing, the agent, the verb, and then the patient, just like in English. However, when we move over to Balinese, it becomes patient, verb, agent, emenge uber cicing. And looking at the other example sentences I've provided, we can see the same thing is going on. Sampine suba adep tiang, the cow sold I, versus Indonesian, saya sudah jual sapi, I sold the cow. And the same with the example sentence, I returned the coffee. And when we move on to a more complex sentence, you can see that the same carries on. They are different. Say, I am teaching English to the child. In Indonesian is saya mengajar anak kecil bahasa Inggris. I teach child English. Versus in Balinese, bahasa Inggris uruk tiang ka anake cenik ento. That is, English teach I to the small child. Now this might seem like a very, very big difference. When it comes to English, the word order carries a lot of strength. Say, dog chases cat and cat chases dog. Those are two completely different meanings. The situation has completely changed. However, with these languages, both can go through a change in syntax. You may have noticed earlier when I gave the first example sentence, the dog chases the cat, I underlined the meng segment of mengejar in Indonesian. That is a prefix that turns the word kejar, to chase, into chasing. That is a active verb, because Indonesian, unlike English, uses a lot of passive voice. So in English, most of what we'd say is, well, the dog chases the cat. Very rarely would we say the cat is chased by the dog. However, in Indonesian, they use that passive construction a lot more. And when you do that in Indonesian, it creates a word order much more similar to Balinese. So if we have a look at emenge uber cicing, beforehand, the dog chases the cat, kucing dikejar oleh anjing, we can see that they have swapped sides. The patient and agent have swapped locations and thus further resemble the Balinese sentence. And this is the same for the I have sold the cow and I have returned the coffee. And this carries on into the more complex example sentence I have given. I am teaching English to the child. They both now have the English teach I to child. They now both have the same syntax. They more closely resemble each other. Now this, it can not only be done in Indonesian, Balinese as well can change its verb construction. So just earlier when I said you add a meng, or what is called a m prefix to a word to make it active, you can do the same in Balinese. So tiang muruk basa as opposed to basa uruk tiang. It now further resembles Indonesian. Furthermore, with I sell the cow, tiang ngadep sampine. And when we move this, and if we apply this to our more complex example sentence, we can see that in Balinese it becomes anake cenek ento urukin tiang bahasa Inggris. Now this might seem a lot more different, but what we have done is we have moved bahasa Inggris from the start to the end, and this is the same as what we could do in Indonesian in the active voice. Saya mengajarkan anak kecil bahasa Indonesia. And I want to draw a lot of attention to mengajarkan and urukin. In Indonesian, when you add the kan suffix, it makes something a transitive verb. So ajar is just study, but mengajarkan is to teach, to make someone else study. And just like that, we can see that anake cenek ento urukin is I teach. So that base word teach, uruk, has been turned into transitive with urukin. Furthermore, we can make the Indonesian sentence even more similar to the Balinese sentence with anak kecil oleh saya ajarkan bahasa Inggris. If we turn it into a passive sentence, we can further see the similarities between Balinese and Indonesian. Moving on with this idea of adding affixes to a verb to change how it is used, we can see that both Indonesian and Balinese not only have this system, but they share huge similarities between them. For instance, let's have a look at Indonesian selesai, complete, can become a verb menyelesai, to complete. We can then compare this to the Balinese word serik, small, to nyerik, to make small. Both of them not only have a base word turned into specifically a verb with a prefix, we can also see that the first consonant has been assimilated into that prefix in much the same way. That is, S has become nya, serik to nyerik, selesai to menyelesai. And it continues in Balinese, keli, grow, to ngeli, to make grow, to Indonesian kurang, to mengurangi. They have assimilated the k into ng, and furthermore the p into m. And this is why I mentioned the Indonesian affix as a m prefix, because it's not just a meng, whereas in Balinese it doesn't have that initial m, it is a nasalized prefix. One of the better ways of comparing the two languages is to have a look at how they both function, and for that I have not just example sentences, but I have a story that was given in both Indonesian and Balinese. That is the traditional Balinese story of Chupak and Grantang, and we can apply what we've learnt to see the similarities between both versions of the story. So starting from the beginning in English. This is a story about Chupak and Grantang. So, here we can see that they both begin with the word ada, that is, there is. And here we can once again see the word order difference. In Indonesian, this is story that is told. In Balinese, this is told is a story. However, both of them have this suffix, making that a story is told. Ada kisah diceritakan in Indonesian, and Balinese katuturang. That is a final ung ending to make a verb passive transitive. That is, a story is told to someone. They are two brothers. So first we can see that they both use this word dua for two. Now the actual word for two in Balinese is different, but you will see poetically used this word dua, i.e. the dua, just like in Indonesian. We can also further see that they have specifically a verb for that. They are both siblings. In Indonesian, ber is the verb prefix, and saudara, meaning sibling, they are both being siblings. It is the same as in Balinese, menyama, me being the verb affix, and nyama meaning siblings. They both are being siblings together. The eldest is Chupak, and the youngest is Grantang. Now, we don't see this in both versions, but we can see in Balinese that there is a an noun construction. Now, that is that where you have the word kelih, to grow up, can become kelihan, eldest, i.e. the most grown up. And cherik, to be small, is cherikan, the youngest. This is very similar as what we do in Indonesian. Lukis is, well, painting, to paint, can become lukisan, a painting. Makan, to eat, becomes makanan, food. You have a noun construction. It is also worth noting that they both have designated words for the youngest child and oldest child. They looked and acted very different from each other. Now here we can see they don't just say they both, they say brother and brother. In Indonesian, kakak beradik ini, that is kakak meaning older sibling, beradik, a verb to have an older sibling, so brother and brother, which is very similar to what it is in Balinese. Beli, brother, adi punika, adi, once again, younger sibling. And we can also see that adi, Balinese, for younger sibling, compared to adik, the Indonesian, for younger sibling. This further on goes to what they use to say that they are both different. That is, sangat jauh berbeda. Jauh literally meaning far, something is quite distant. This is the same in Balinese. Do meaning distant. Do pesan Matiosan. And once again we can see that there is the verb creation for the word difference. In Indonesian beda, in Balinese tios, they have become verbs. Berbeda, to be different, Matiosan. And that is all I had. It took me months to make this. It is honestly disappointing how long it took. Huge thanks to the people who made the various sources I used. I should give them down below, but it was very hard to bring myself to do this, specifically the recording part. Also, huge shout out to any of the Indo Bros watching. Maaf kalau bahasaku jelek, tidak dapat sering berlatih. Makasih. If you have any corrections or you want to make, or any feedback on how awful my Indonesian is, feel more than free to put it down below. Huge thanks for bearing with me. But I thank you all for watching, if you indeed did. I'm sorry if you found this boring. More entertaining stuff on the way. I'll see what I can do to this in editing to make it more interesting. Either way, I hope you enjoyed. And once again, this is by no means a comprehensive comparison of the two languages, but it is something that I sincerely urge you to at least take a cursory glance at, because it is a heavily interesting topic, and it is one of the most interesting things about studying Indonesian, is how much of a gateway into other languages it really is. And because of that, is almost a gateway into linguistics as a whole, which it was for me. So thank you all so very much for watching. I shall see you in the future.